Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. This past Christmas Eve, my friend Edgar the Poe Museum cat was obliged to dispatch with a certain intruder out there in the Enchanted Garden. And while I dispose of the remains, why don't I regale you with another installment of the Curator's Crypt. Tonight I'd like to show you one of the Poe Museum's most recent acquisitions. This. It's a letter from Edgar Allan Poe to his foster father, John Allan's business partner and best friend, Charles Ellis. So here it is. It doesn't look like much, but it is the only surviving letter between Poe and this important connection to his Richmond childhood. So who's Charles Ellis? Well, John Allan here and Charles Ellis were co-owners of the Ellis and Allan firm. And they were importer-exporters, and later Charles Ellis ran a dry goods business. And for about 6 months, Edgar and the Allans actually lived in Charles Ellis's house. And Poe became good friends with Charles Ellis's son, Thomas. And we actually have in our collection a book here that was owned by Thomas Ellis and signed by Ellis on the end paper. And Thomas Ellis told a lot about his childhood with Poe, gave interviews, wrote newspaper articles, and among other things, he said that Poe led me to do many a forbidden thing for which I was punished. He taught me to skate, to shoot, and to play bandy. Bandy is sort of an old-fashioned version of ice hockey. And we're not sure what kind of skating, whether it was ice skating or an early form of roller skating, because an early sort of roller skate did exist at that time. Who knows, maybe Poe was also the one who invented skateboarding, not Marty McFly. And Poe was also very close to the Ellis daughter. Apparently he used to chase her around with a toy snake until she cried. I didn't say she liked him, they were just close. But the Ellis children used to call John Allan here Uncle Allan, they loved him so much. And Poe was part of the family who's grown up, actually living with them for 6 months after all. And Ellis also owned a garden across the street, a big walled garden. And remember, Edgar and his girlfriend Elmira used to sneak away to that little walled garden. And that's where they became secretly engaged. And Poe did pay tribute to Ellis's garden in a short story called The Domain of Arnheim, in which the character Ellison, not Ellis, but Ellison, is the greatest gardener in the world. He spends all of his millions of dollars, back when a millionaire was a really, really rare thing, to create the perfect landscape garden. So Poe's paying tribute to him. But Poe sort of fell out of touch with the Ellises and Allans. He, at the age of 18, ran away from home, enlisted in the army. When he finally did come back to Richmond, it was years later. Frances Allan, his foster mother, had passed away. John Allan was on his deathbed, or actually in his death chair. He couldn't even lie down anymore. He was just sitting in a chair propped up. And Allan by that time had remarried, not really informed Edgar of the situation. So Edgar showed up at the Allan house where he'd been living before he went to college. And the second Mrs. Allan had no idea who he was and wouldn't let him in the house, so they fought. And he pushed her out of the way and went up to Allan. And Allan just looked at him and said, "Go away," shook his cane at him, "I never want to see you again." And that was it. Allan died shortly thereafter. And supposedly, Thomas Ellis is our source on these things. Poe went back to see the second Mrs. Allan after that, and she just declined to see him because she just wasn't feeling up for it. But there was a rift between the second Mrs. Allan, her 3 kids, and Edgar that never resolved. And even Poe's foster aunt, Frances Allan's sister, who lived in the house, she didn't have anything to do with Edgar after that. And also, Poe sort of cut off contact with his foster uncle, who's her cousin, Edward Valentine, for years and years after that. But what about the Ellises? Well, about a year after John Allan died, Poe returned to Richmond. He got a magazine job here in town, but he's still keeping his options open, and he applied for a teaching position at the Richmond Academy. And guess who was on the board of the Richmond Academy? Charles Ellis. So needless to say, Poe did not get the teaching job he wanted, so he started working at the magazine. And not long after he got the job there, he brought his cousin and her mother down to Richmond and eventually married his cousin Virginia. And Virginia and her mother really had nowhere else to go. They were at hard times. And the family came with all those sort of ideas for keeping them afloat. One was to go in with his boss and buy a house together. He was planning on starting a boarding house so they could take in boarders to their houses, raise extra money, because the magazine job wasn't paying the bills to keep them in the lifestyle that Poe had been accustomed to growing up. So another plan Poe had was to approach Charles Ellis, who was running that dry goods business, and just ask him for some credit. Kind of like taking out a store credit card. You'll take out so much credit and you can get some dry goods from the dry goods store. And these were things like fabric and clothing and spices and sugar and things. So good all-purpose store. And that's what this letter is all about. And one thing we can tell just off the bat is in the back here, there's no postmark. It wasn't mailed. It was hand-delivered. And it was probably Poe's mother-in-law who did the cooking, cleaning, running errands and things, who hand-delivered this. And it says, "Dear sir, do you think you could oblige me so far as to let me have the amount of $50 in dry goods upon a credit of 4 months? If so, I'd be greatly indebted to you, and my aunt will call down to choose such articles as she may wish. Very respectfully, Edgar A. Poe." Mr. Charles Ellis, September 26, 1836. And Poe had just gotten married back in May, so he's only been married a few months here, and he just wants a credit at the dry goods store. But after all these years, had Charles Ellis harbored a grudge against the foster son that John Allan hated so much? Did he extend that $50 credit to Poe? And if so, did Poe pay it back? I'm tempted to think that Charles Ellis didn't give him the credit. And that's because when Poe filed for bankruptcy in 1843, he left a list of all his creditors, the people he couldn't pay back, and Charles Ellis wasn't on that list. So I tend to think that maybe Ellis didn't give him the money, but at the same time, the real way to check it out is the Ellis and Allan papers, which are in the Library of Congress. And there are something like 400 individual boxes of these papers, all the business correspondence for that magazine, all the ledgers. So they make notes of every single transaction. And we at the Poe Museum, we've gone up there and we've made it up until about 1831. So we need to go back and check out September, October of 1836 to find out if they actually did extend the credit. But what do you think? Would Charles Ellis, good friend here of Poe's despised foster father, have actually extended him a credit? Or did he just say, go fend for yourself? Let us know down in the comments. And if you'd like to help us preserve precious Poe pieces, like Thomas Ellis's book, or this rare letter, one of a kind, the only surviving letter from Poe to Charles Ellis, why not support the Poe Museum or become a patron at poemuseum.org. And until next time, thanks for joining us. And I'll leave you with more gratuitous footage of Edgar the Poe Museum cat doing Edgar the Poe Museum cat stuff.